Welcome to another episode of Fresh Pulp Magazine's Dark Matters Spaces. My name is Jay Austin Yoshino. This is my co-host, the amazing and the talented Margari Hill. She is the co-founder and director of Muslim Arc. They are the co-sponsors of this podcast. They are an anti-racism collaborative. They offer anti-racism collaborative training. I took the training, and I got to tell you, even as somebody who felt like they were up on the skills, I learned some things. Welcome, Margari. How are you today?
Thank you. I'm good. I had an early flight, and I'm on location. I'm in the Bay. Hopefully we can get some bullet train in California.
Heck
Make
yeah.
it easier.
Yes. I now because you also are you've flown to the Bay Area from SoCal, where you went to SDCC, which we will get to in just a moment. We're going to talk about your what you did there and your experience at San Diego Comic-Con, which is like the big it's like the biggest con in the country. So what I want to start with, are we going to talk about the strike, the Netflix, and the are we going to rock that
Yeah.
out?
Let's talk about the writers and the actors strike. I mean that was really significant. Before I left, I actually saw someone picketing. I mean, he was by his lonesome, but it was just like a powerful moment. Took a picture and said I was in solidarity. It's like, look, I'm here for the creatives. I'm here for y'all, not the studios.
Cool.
So
But you
we
also
can
sent me an
start.
article
Yeah.
which we were like we were going to discuss black holes, but we'll come back to that next week. And we're going to talk this week about the Silicon Valley's buy-in, about how Hollywood bought into Silicon Valley's mythology of perpetual growth and perpetual scaling, which obviously in their minds equates to perpetual profits, but it didn't turn out that way. So do you want to give us a little bit more of an overview on that?
Yeah, so Brian Merchant, a columnist with the Los Angeles Times, wrote a really powerful article titled "Hollywood is on strike because CEOs fell for Silicon Valley's magical thinking." Right? There is an illogic, right, to unfettered capitalism. So it's not a model that works. Just great article.
Yeah, I had an opportunity to read that article, and I'm one of the reasons, another reason why we started Fresh Pulp, because it is the objective of Fresh Pulp is to eventually be a collectively owned and operated magazine, and I believe that collective ownership is really the way of the future because your employees are also your bosses, and everyone has a vested interest in the company doing well, and that's really the key to growth. Even though I don't believe in perpetual growth, I think that mythology simply needs to die because people equate perpetual growth with perpetual profit. And most times, the only way you can actually achieve profit is by cutting costs, which very frequently leads to unsafe working conditions, and it leaves many workers with lower pay and less benefits. So that was the thing that struck me about that.
Yeah, I mean it is that like even with this model, right? Like where we have venture capitalists pouring a lot of money into dot coms, and they did the same model with streaming. And so you have some of the early investors, these venture capitalist firms, and the CEOs that they're really making a lot of money, but the creatives aren't. And part of this debate is also just like the use of AI to on the likeness of actors and the use of AI in scripts where they're trying to underpay their writers. And both of us, we have a background in writing, in creative writing, and this is of deep concern and around of just generating scripts and then underpaying writers who'll have to clean up those scripts. So the streaming economics where they're hiding the profits, that's also something that's of concern. Um, the main issue is that if they had some transparency on the actual numbers, that the investors in the stock market would freak out and that we would go into an economic free fall.
That's an interesting take because and I want to sort of dovetail with what you said because I read an article not too long ago where they were interviewing. I think it was Steven Spielberg. It was one of the quote unquote old timers, and they weren't bashing Marvel movies this time. But someone asked them about the studios, and they said, well, back when I was coming up, the studios were not run by the studios run by investment bankers now, right? They're not they you know, and even though our objective was to turn a profit back in the day, you had people who were willing to take risks on creative and artistic endeavors, and some of the greatest movies that we have seen in the last really in cinema were born out of that collaboration between the studio executives and the creators. And and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that Hollywood was perfect by any means back then. They still have serious problems, but now we have all those serious problems still. Plus, we have people who are just treating Hollywood like a piggy bank.
Definitely, that is a big concern. They don't understand audiences. They don't understand streaming and the implications of streaming. And like I mean, they're making decisions, right? Even like cutting losses. So it's really had a profound effect on writers and actors.
Now, I want to ask you about this too because I agree with you that they are having they don't understand audiences, but at the same time, you have like Mission Impossible, what, like 5 or 6 that just came out, which and the last Mission Impossible was literally like barely a year ago. So, and I feel like Tom Cruise has now just kind of locked himself into like he's like, I'm going to sunset my career with just an endless stream of like Mission Impossible. So, would you say that we are in the era of endless reboots because the studios don't understand their audience?
Yeah, I mean, well, marketing is going to drive things to what they're investing in to get in front of possible viewers and audiences. There's ways that they can rig the system by like packing the theater so you know what you're going to see. So yeah, I mean, we're going to get a lot of lack of creativity and and this applies both within people who are going to the theaters, but also what people are sitting down and watching. So since we don't have those numbers, right? Like I mean, it's not entirely clear. You have investors sort of like they're kind of like gambling. They're gambling on people's lives, but investing a lot of like even early on. I remember there was so much hype about like the author talks about Hemlock Grove, which was actually it's an unfinished book series, and that was a terrible series. But they invested so much money in that horrible like I mean it was just straight trash. So like we do have to think about what they're throwing money at and what they're investing in. And, in the long run, like, I mean, what is going to be our responsibility as consumers to, like, so, I mean, what have you done? 'Cause I know you've taken some action in, in this current climate.
Well, I mean, I did write. You can go over to Fresh Pulp and check out my essay. It's entitled "A Material, AI, a Material Analysis." And so I did do a material analysis. And for those of you who don't know what material analysis is, it is an economic analysis through the lens of Marxism, right? And so people have this view that Marxism is like standing in line waiting for toilet paper and basic necessities, which is garbage. What it is it is an economic system, but it is an economic system that is approached from not an empirical but a mathematical, scientific, so it's not just based upon repeating patterns or previous perceptions of things. It's also based upon science. So the encouragement is scientific. So you look at something like artificial intelligence. I wanted to look at who was going to benefit the most based upon my material analysis. And really, AI, well, let's be clear. Artificial intelligence is not intelligence, okay? It is iterative, right? It has the capacity to, quote unquote, learn, but really it's just mimicking, okay? And also the Chat GPT-4 has shown that. It's shown that the more it samples, the dumber it gets. So what they're doing is
Becomes more human.
yeah, right. Exactly. It's becoming more human, right? But also it is what they're using it for, and the people in Silicon Valley and the people in Hollywood know this. What they're using it for is they're using it to dilute, as you pointed out previously, to dilute the value of labor, because the people in the ruling class, they really detest the idea of having to rely on labor to achieve anything. And if they can have a computer do most of the legwork and then pay some other guy minimum wage to do the rest, they will do that.
Definitely, definitely. You could see the disparities in treatment all throughout Hollywood and their cheapness. And I mean, if you have like CEOs and the executives raking in millions of dollars, like 27 million, and saying it's unreasonable to pay the writers, I mean, that's like, come on now. I mean, it is absolutely doable to pay everyone a livable wage. And when you see the disparities between what CEOs make and what the everyday staff makes, it's deplorable. So yeah, solidarity with the writers. Just
I wanted to point
I
out too that
definitely
one of the
oh
was
yeah.
it Bob Iger that said that we're going to wait this thing out and we're going to wait until people start losing their houses.
Oh,
Isn't that
yeah.
what he said? One of the executives said this, and that got leaked. And I want to point out to people that it's very easy for us to point at people who are uber wealthy and insist that they are out of touch. They know exactly what a gallon of milk costs, right? Because they'll
Hmm.
be the first person bargaining to get that at half cost. That's how they make their money. They don't make their money by hard work. They make their money by being cheap and screwing other people. Okay, and so when they say we're going to wait until people lose their houses, they know exactly what's at stake. They know that people, and they're even telling you we are relying on that person's fear of being jobless and homeless to
Hmm.
continue to extract labor disproportionately from that person compared to their pay.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to see a lot of divide and conquer. There's a lot of tactics. So I'm definitely interested to see how our, the screenwriters and actors, like, what are ways that they can really raise awareness and build solidarity? Because that's going to be the key. The key is going to
Yeah,
be like people power to
yeah.
push back. And it's not just boycotting, right? We're going to have to like make visible what's happening. So, I mean, definitely like when we think about what we're doing right now, um, as far as like being and our role in the industry, reviewing content isn't, crossing the picket line. We're not promoting new content. We're critiquing the content that's coming out, and really trying to uplift, do what we can to uplift the plight of creatives. Because who gets hurt most? It's marginalized creatives, and that's particularly people of color, indigenous, black, Asian,
Yep.
Southwest Asian, African, Latino, um, gender, like women, especially marginalized women, because not all of us are all equal, right?
Right.
And
We don't
we
have the
see
same lived
we see
experience.
that,
Absolutely.
yeah. So we definitely, and for those who are targeted because of their identities, whether that's like gender, sexuality, disabilities, that they're going to be the first ones on the line to lose their houses because of all of those vulnerabilities.
Yes, agreed. And I want to say for the record, in case there's any doubt about anybody, I'm always in favor of the workers. I'm always going to side with the
Hmm.
workers. So Fresh Pulp Magazine is categorically, I'm announcing it right now, we are in solidarity with those who are striking, with their families, with every worker, restaurant, film, everything. And I want to say for those of you who have taken the new unnuanced view that this is just a bunch of rich actors who are trying to demand more money, you are completely wrong. Okay, only about 12% of guild members actually qualify for the 26,000 annual income to get health insurance. Most of the other people do not, and they are basically gig workers, and they are working second jobs, and they are living in substandard conditions. So like 90% of people who are striking are not those rich people. And I'm going to tell you right now too, those other 10%, they're okay, right? Not all of them, but like the top like 1 to 2%, yeah, they're fine, but they're not the ones that are demanding more money. It's the ones who can't live that are demanding more money.
Thank you for that clarification. And that's important because, people have been trying to spin that narrative that the writers were greedy. And it's just really atrocious.
Yeah. I wanted to mention too, because one of the things that and you know this about me, one of the things that I always harp on whenever we watch TV or movies, the number one thing I look at is the writing, right? And one of the things that I bemoan constantly is the fact that they don't spend enough money on writers, right? So you will have a movie that's $350 million, but it has the worst script you've ever seen, you know, and it's like you should have a team of writers, right, whose only job it is to make that script work. But it's like you got one person and then the guy who actually wrote the movie, and that's it. So, and they're making, probably not that much. So, so I want to segue into whoops. I want to segue into your Comic Con adventures. I know that you go like almost every year, at least since I've
I
known
just
you.
started. Yeah, well, since we've been talking about comics and sci-fi, and so last year I was invited by Dr. Shamika Mitchell to participate on Salam Fandom at the San Diego Comic Con, and that is the largest one of a family of conventions that do occur, like in WonderCon. There's New York Con, but San Diego somehow like they just have like it's huge, huge. Like all the hotels that it fills up, and it's a big industry event of all people that um, relate to the comic industry, and whether it's like the films to the comics. So one goal I didn't get this year, but I'm going to actually do it. I'm going to probably do it online, is that my daughter's uncle is a comic book artist, and so I'm going to get some for her. So I'm going to invest in
Nice.
that. I mean, so it's her paternal uncle, um, Michael Manley. He's done, I mean, since for years, decades. So we did have, not that his work has anything to do with what we do now, but always had a deep interest in it. But it's also like it is definitely part of family and that family heritage. My daughter's sketching now, so
Nice. Awesome.
hopefully
Love to hear it.
maybe one day,
Love to
maybe
hear
one
it.
day. Yeah.
So can I ask
Yeah.
you about Slam fandom? Can you give me like kind of a like what is Slam fandom?
Yeah, well, let me pull up the more information, like some of the bylines of that work, because Shamika also does work with women in comics.
Mm.
So they have a booth and they organize like women. Because I mean, if you look at the comic book industry, the misogyny is real. The objectification of women is real. Like it's like there's some booths I won't bring my daughter into because I don't think she needs to see those unrealistic images of women. But Salam fandom, a few years ago, I saw that they had a a presence and highlighting Muslim cosplayers, just Muslims who are part of being fans. And given that we're one out of every four people on Earth, I mean, it would make sense, right? And so uplifting that work is really important. This year we had a cipher, so it was really great to have creatives of various backgrounds who, whether it's like historical to kind of sci-fi, like the kind of more traditional comics, and people who are writing science fiction, and we came together to talk about Muslim futures. And so that was really great. A lot of times people talk about Muslims like we're so obsessed with the past and conservative and preserving the past. And right now, as we speak, right, it is we're going into Ashura, right, which is this remembrance of the past. But when you see the kind of things, it's like the past has absolute relevance today. And so that was something that we were able to talk about in our cipher.
Nice. It's funny too how people accuse Muslims or POC or Black folks of being obsessed with the past, but then you have all these books, movies, TV shows that are obsessed with, a simpler time, quote unquote, meaning a time that's devoid of people of color. So, so I find that interesting. And so, did you feel, well, first of all, did you drop the knowledge? I want to know.
Of course, I mean, I had to come with the history.
Right.
So part of that was there were some critiques around censorship and being the medievalist that I am. So that's where I kind of tend to like some of the fantasy. Well, I kind of love that work. And but the critique of where I pushed back and said that a lot of the medieval literature, whether it's poetry or stories, they were very explicit. And that's something that this idea of censoring, especially around sensuality and love, that's not something from the Muslim tradition when they were very explicit about lovers and, and talking like very directly about body parts and naming it, so that was something that's Victorian notion. I also talked about the speculative story Hai Ibn Yaqdan by Ibn Tufel, which I feel fits within our category of theoretical
Okay.
science fiction.
I haven't read it. I'll have to check it
Theoretical
out.
fiction. Yes, because it is a philosophical story about that is, I mean, it's a philosophical story about how can someone discover God on their own using logic. So it has the story of a little boy who grows up on an island and through his scientific method comes to understand life and death and that there's something beyond. Sometimes people make it into a children's story. It's a little bit gruesome, because
A little exotheology. Nice.
Yeah, he dissects his mother. So if you have Bambi, but even worse, because he tries to figure
Yeah.
out what's, like, because a doe takes care of him.
Right.
So it's a very interesting book because it is that theoretical fiction. And how can we come to understand something that's metaphysical? And when we kind of get beyond this bifurcation between like sacred and spiritual and material, but it's like how we understand the ultimate reality. I think it still fits. Like it is very scientific to understand that beyond. So
Yeah.
it's like,
Interesting.
yeah, it's like, so we're gonna put that in our canon.
I'm gonna check it out.
Yeah.
So that brings us to, well, we still have a little time. Is there anything else you want to talk about with regards to San Diego Comic Con?
Well, I saw that there was much more of a Muslim presence this year, and people interested in what Muslim creatives were doing. There were Muslim cosplayers, so I did come out with my cosplay. Like I was like,
yeah.
okay, I'm not quite a character, I'm me, but when you think about, well, I am a character,
Right.
so I'll give it that. But when you think about the
Ham
kind
is
of
haram.
yes. So when you think about the styles of dress or the modalities of Muslim women, so so I was just able to like modify a little bit and fit right in. Like it didn't really take much to like
Right.
be in full costume, which in a lot of ways, when you have Muslim women, we're beyond, I mean, while we're still following some fashion trends, we're looking to the past to try to come up with like whether it's modern lines, modern ways of dressing. And so for me it was like, wow, like I could fit right in like Muslim garb, doing different things with my outfits. So I took my dress that I bought for Wakanda Forever and I threw in my love of
Nice.
corsetry. And then I was just like, so some people were like, I like that gothic, like that gothic look. And it worked.
Nice. I want to, since you mentioned, bring up the historical perspective before we move on to our discussion about Foundation. I want to remind everyone, if you don't know already, that Margari has an excellent article called "The Hidden Blackness of Dune." Did I get that title right? Dune's Hidden Blackness. Sorry,
The
the
hidden
hidden,
black roots of Dune.
the hidden black roots of Dune. Sorry. I should know that back and forth because anyway. So the hidden black roots of Dune. It's over at Fresh Pulp. You can access it by just going right to freshpulpmag.com. It's right there on the front page in the top left, just under the header. It is a fantastic article in which Margari offers a historical analysis to support the fact that the Fremen were black. So, it's a great article, and I was so excited to finally get it up on the website. Um, but having said that, we can talk about Foundation. But check out the article. Let's talk about Foundation. And by the way, I'm gonna keep flogging that like until basically November. So just everybody get used to it. So
There's going to be more Dune articles. We're going to have some more Dune articles
we're gonna have the
coming
Dune
'cause
parade.
I
I
can't.
mean, once the Bene Gesserit show comes out, it's gonna be like all Dune all the time on here. Um, so Foundation episode 2. It's really funny because I want to do the beats, but I can remember so little about that episode. Even though it's not that it wasn't memorable. It's just there was just so much going on this week. But I guess I'm gonna try and do the beats real quick. But at the end of so basically like episode 1, Leah, Salvor and Gail link up, and she's like, "I'm your daughter." So and basically at the end of that episode, Harry Seldon comes out of the at the AI, and he's like, you what did you do? You left me in you left me in the knife. So what happened was when Gale escaped from Harry Seldon's ship, which was taking them to his home planet, she took this knife out of its cradle, which is what was holding his consciousness in it, and basically got into her little cryo capsule and launched herself into space, where she was asleep for 138 years. When she got to Synaxia, her home, she took the knife and she discovers Salvor. They talk, but while Salvor was sleeping, she took the knife and transferred Harry's consciousness into the Prime Radiant. Now, the reason why that's important is because once they escape, they basically are trying to escape Synaxia because there's a storm coming. She and Salvor, Salvor's ship, the Beggar, is underwater. They dive down to it. They activate the ship, and where we left off, they were basically in the ship, but they were like on the tides. And in case anyone doesn't know, Synaxia is a water planet, so it's a giant, basically planet-wide typhoon. It's threatening to destroy them. So right when they're trying to get the ship started, but there's a fault in the ship's computer, and she's like, "Look, just download Harry into the ship, and he will find the fault very quickly because he's an AI, and we'll be fine." And she's like, "No," like Gail's like, "No, I'm not doing that because whatever. I hate Harry." And anyway, and so Salvor's like, "Well, we're gonna die basically if you don't do it." So she does. Harry shows up, and he's like, "You left me. You left me in the Prime Meridian. You left me in. Basically captured in his construct, not the Prime Meridian because that didn't come till later." And she's like, "So?" And he's like, "I was conscious for 138 years, right?" His consciousness was awake in this construct, this knife, for 140 years. So she's like, "Look, we don't have time to air our grievances. Can you just help us because we're gonna die?" So he goes in the ship. He clears the fault. Salvor basically goes outside, clears some barnacles from the stabilizer, and they take off. So now, flash forward, there is a couple of people in red robes, and they're wearing these necklaces that look like the vault, the Harry Seldon vault, and they are on this. I honestly was disoriented by this part because I was like, "What is going on here?" But there are two people who appear to be kind of like priests or acolytes, and they're on this planet, and they're trying to. They discover that one of their cohorts has been murdered by the locals on this planet. I don't remember the name of the planet, but it's a backwater. Anyway, what you discover, I'm going to skip ahead because it's like explaining all of it's crazy. But what you discover is that these two priests are basically from the Foundation, and they have like a religion that they've made out of Harry Seldon's teachings. And they are trying to convince these people on this planet essentially to join them, to join the Foundation and the other Outer Reach planets. Basically to take up, to join them in an alliance against the Empire. But they're innately very hostile towards outsiders because the Empire used to occupy them and basically left, which I have a lot to say about. Anyway, they basically leave, and because they were summoned, they go back to Terminus to find out that the vault has opened. So it's been 138 years since they've seen Harry Seldon. Everybody on the planet who was alive at that time is dead, except for one of the priests, and the vault is open. So they go back. There's this debate about who gets to be present at the vault when Harry Seldon comes out. The priest, one of the priests is the younger Indian boy, the younger Asian boy. I'm pretty sure it's him, who's just grown up, and he's 100 years old now. He's 100 and probably he's probably about 150 years by now old, and he's kind of like a drunk and a drug addict, and they're like, dude, no, we can't have you present when Harry Seldon comes out. Anyway, so let's go to Trantor, where Empire Day is courting this woman, Dominion, and they're having dinner, and really this woman is really just kind of obnoxious because, I mean, let's be clear, like I love this Dominion woman to death, but like she is relentless in dogging the Cleonic dynasty. Like she's like, we're gonna have babies, and basically we're gonna have like retroactive regicide through procreation. Like it was nuts. And she's like, can I see the tanks and whatever? And he's like, yeah, sure. Like he's really, really like every time she talks, I'm like, he's gonna do that little thing, wave with his hand, and people are gonna shoot her. I mean, I know that he can't because he needs her, but I'm like, whoa. But also, she says a lot of things that are kind of indecorous, and even though I was really digging her vibe, I was like, that's not something I would ever say in polite company. Anyway, so there's this big debate not debate, but there's a lot of talk about why she's necessary. And she even insists, like, you need me because your empire is shrinking, and and mine is smaller than yours, but your empire is shrinking. It was very bizarre. Anyway,
did you think he was really like? Oh, we could go into it in the thing. Like
yeah,
earlier he was kind of because she was nagging.
No, I didn't think he was going to because it was clear by that time that he was really. Yeah, I mean, it was clear by that time that he really wanted to marry her. And she talked about, she addressed some rumors surrounding her murdering her family, etc. In any case, I feel like I'm getting off track.
I'm sorry, I had to throw that in there.
No.
But yeah, like but you get to see like where he's just like, I'm done with this cyclical the genetic dynasty, which is not in the book, but this is part of the series, which actually is like a unique thing, which allows us to see the empire having a personality, or just seeing these kind of long dynasties over this long durée history. And make us, it gets us to the second crisis. So that's where
that was the thing that I glossed over. I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. Well, that was from the previous episode. So yeah, no, I didn't miss it for this episode, but I wanted to sort of move forward briefly where they were examining the new branch that arrived of crises, which they assert may be an unending stream of crises, and Harry is kind of like, okay. He explains to Salvor that, look, there was supposed to be a second foundation, and Salvor's like, what? And he's like, yes. And like, then Gale is like, oh, I get it now. Like, the reason for the second foundation is so that you guys could basically, manipulate, the situation from a distance while simultaneously using the first foundation. It's kind of like to draw fire. And he was like, now you get it. And I was like, is this guy really going to be smarmy about this? Anyway, but Salvor doesn't get it. She's like, wait, why are we talking about foundation like it's the enemy? And he's like, because they are potentially. Like, all empires essentially are born out of the carrion of old empires, right? And new empires can be every bit as pernicious and vicious and destructive as any other. And anyway, so they decide that Gale now has to access the Prime Meridian and use her sort of. I used to think that it was just kind of an intuition, but it seems more now that it's actually like a telepathy, a psionic power. And so she accesses this point in the timeline where she sees what's going to happen. And there's a guy there, I forget what his name is, who is basically around the corner from coming into existence, as the new set of...
The Mule.
The Mule, that's his name.
yeah, like that's a big character that
It,
I
it
don't
is, but
connect with
I keep getting the
first.
Hober Mallow thing stuck in my mind, and
Yes.
I kept
Yeah,
wanting to say Hober.
yeah, I don't know, cause yeah, cause there she gets that name, but
Right,
then when she accesses cause then it's like Sal was this the daughter, like she also has like kind of like the revert, like she
right.
can
She can see the past.
remember. Yeah, she
Right.
can see the past and one can see the future. So they have this ability, um, which is new. Like I'm still trying to kind of like make sense of the how does
Yeah.
this relate to the first foundation or where we're at in the novel series because I'm only familiar with the first book,
I
but
mean, I
I'm like,
haven't read
oh,
them in
are
like
we
20
out of the
years.
first book?
Yeah.
Are we out of it? Because it's like we're in the second crisis because last season they did go into that first major crisis,
Yeah.
which was I mean I was kind of like, okay, that's unique, like they pulled it off. um but yeah, like I'm gonna let you finish the beats because I
So,
have some
yeah.
questions.
Okay. So basically, she gets transported to a future that's like completely decimated, and there's this guy running around like shooting at her, and he grabs her, and as it turns out, he's a telepath, and not only can he see her and interact with her, but he can see like into her past, like he knows who she is. So that in and of itself is a challenge, and she comes back and tells Harry this, and she's like, "Do you know who Homer Mallow is?" And everyone's like, "No." Flash forward, finally, everybody goes to the vault, right, to wait for Harry Seldon to arrive because it's been activated and it's been opened, and they're all like prostrating and using these flowery words and stuff. And this guy played by Holt McElhenney, who, by the way, I love this actor, but he always either gets into shows that get canceled after one season or he dies, right, when he's a guest. So he's like, Harry Seldon, please come out and make yourself known to you, and we've been waiting for you, blah, 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 blah. The vault grabs him, burns him into a crisp, and then the words Hober Mallow appear on the sides of the vault. So those are pretty much my beats. If I missed something, feel free to throw it in there because I feel like I was taking really long with the beats. Um, but that's the story, basically. And I want to hear your questions. What do you have to say, Margaret? You said you had some things you wanted to address.
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess like yeah, looking up because we're definitely gonna have to go into the lore to understand, but then it's like it's just gonna mess us up going into the lore because I mean we're gonna sort of know what's supposed to happen, but it's gonna be all in a remix in Foundation. So what I do hope is that people like I mean I'll probably have to like just get all the novels and just just we have
Yeah.
to just get into it over the
Okay,
next
so
next few weeks.
let me start off with a comment about this, and then I want you to sort of give me your take on it, if that's cool.
Hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so one of the things that's bugged me since the very first, and we touched upon this, that's bugged me since the very first episode of the first season, is this tendency to deify leaders. And we talk about this
Hmm.
idea of being very tolerant and forgiving of leaders' moral failings and bad behavior because they're bringing us messages of hope or they're leaders of revolutions. This show seems to be doubling down on that idea to the point where they're legitimately deifying him now. Like they're kneeling before the vault and like saying supplications, and they have a priesthood, which is a separate issue kind of, but it relates to this. I want your take on this because it really left a bad taste in my mouth.
Um. Wow. Okay. So there is a cult of science. So this is um, that there is this cult of scientism. Sort of trying to show the wonders of science, and if you believe in this thing, that we do have that when we have some of the humanist movement where they have made it kind of like a religion where if something you can't attach it to something material then it doesn't exist. So what does that say about love or things that we have not discovered, right?
Sure.
And things that we may be imagining, um, or that's a possibility, right? Like, so I think it's one thing to be agnostic and to be like we don't know what we don't know, right? But it's another thing to be like, that is not possible. So I think that there is, we have in the modern age of, and we could see this during like real modernity, right? Like with scientific thinking and the Enlightenment, that there were certain beliefs and they absolutely believed like this is how reality works. And what we're finding is it's much more complex. You know, there's a lot of nuances. There's a lot of like wormholes, black holes, things that just kind of shape reality and space. So I think that when it comes to that absolute faith in a leader or an ideology, that can lead us to a type of extremism, which is my concern around some of the secular thought, like where they want to eliminate our religion and the kind of mystery out of life. So in some ways, I get that critique, So I'm kind of digging it. I know, there's different feelings about it. Like you may think like scientists could never, but they have.
Well, I don't. Okay, so the thing is that I like the critique. I just feel like the deification of Harry Seldon has gotten to this point of absurdity to
Mm-hmm.
me, right? Like they created Terminus because the Cleonic dynasty was holding themselves up as deities, right? By cloning
Mm-hmm.
themselves over and over and over again, there was this illusion of immortality. But I'm going to fold my next sort of comment into this, and then we can sort of discuss it more holistically, which is the use of a clergy to perpetuate the idea of a Selden, a Harry Seldon theology, right? Which, by the way, is not really it's rooted in, to me, more like materialism. Do you know what I mean? It's like, hey, if you want comfort and you want technology, follow us, right? So, and I feel like you probably more than anybody would see the similarity between that and the Missionaria Protectiva from like Dune.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, well, it had to render, so it looks like they tried to render Harry Seldon's Seldon's views, so to make those infallible, right? When it's like, I mean, was it really that accurate? How could he test that in his lifetime? This is the thing that kind of bothers me. Like, you would have to maybe if the AI had been around long enough to say, like, yeah, we took his psychohistory, and over the past 500 years, he's been spot on, but we didn't really get that before he died, right? Like, so I'm kind of like, I could see where was this cult. I'm still not always understanding the visualization either. Like, how is that visualization making any sense for them really understanding what's happening? But I mean, it's the magic. It's like, of TV. But I could see that when it comes to like a cult is not something that's necessarily reproduced. A religion is something that's reproduced over generations, right? So what takes something that is like this one moment where people are following a leader who has a vision, and that the development of a organized religion around it, and to kind of keep these ideas going. I thought it was creative. I thought it
Sure.
was useful to think about, um, and for us to kind of think about what are we doing now? Like, what are we doing now? Like, whether we're creating our own cults of empiricism, like and in that cultural reproduction of the orthodoxies, what are lies that we're telling ourselves? How are people getting exploited through that? So lots to think
The
about.
thing that I got from it though too is it reminded me of, it was so on the nose with Christian missionary, missionaries. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like if you look at how, for example, the post-Roman Empire, how rapidly Christians spread, right? It was no longer being suppressed. Well, and obviously, the Emperor of Constantinople converted, etc. But then you had people who were proselytizing, and that's what they're doing. Like they are the thing that bugged me about it was how similar it was to me in my mind to Christian missionaries coming to the New World and basically preaching to like the indigenous peoples and trying to convert them. The second thing that bugged me was that their job essentially is to bring these former quote unquote outer rim planets into the fold with Terminus. But objectively speaking, and their objective is to create bodies and access to resources that they can then use to fight off the Empire. So I mean, their objectives are probably every bit as cynical. I mean, they may be trying to achieve a larger aim, but you're basically trying to dupe these people who have a limited quote unquote understanding of technology, etc., into offering themselves up in a battle that really isn't theirs.
They're going to be the losers in the end, and that the long, but in the long term, you're going to there. The hope is that, well, the goal is that it would shorten this period of chaos where billions and billions of
Sure,
people would die.
sure.
And these are like the outer rim people who are marginalized. I mean, it did feel very European. It felt very medieval where they were. And did remind me, speaking of the Roman Empire, it kind of reminded me of like those outposts of like missionaries going into Europe, right? And they're trying to convert the Vikings, so it's just like against the decadence of the Roman Empire. So
Right.
very, I mean, when it comes to sci-fi aesthetics, that was something that was on the panel where they talked about the aesthetics of the future are often drawn from the past, and a lot of the aesthetics are also Muslim aesthetics. So yeah, I mean, I'm going to be on the lookout for that. But I think right now it just feels very like you could tell there's some medieval, some Europeans in there, and they're trying to put in the remix. What's going
I
on?
wanted to
So
also throw back that these missionaries, again, I love to reference this episode. This is one of my favorite episodes when Cleon went and did that pilgrimage, right? He was achieving, even though in his instance, he was cynically exploiting a fortuitous confluence of events, right? Which he's probably trained to see and exploit that sort of thing. Um,
hmm
but the result was no different, right? He managed to use his vision to essentially buy the complicity of this clergy in his quest for domination and to suppress, a potential rebellion. So, like, I look at this thing with these clerics, these missionaries, and I think the same thing. Like, they are using a religious sort of subtext or maybe even text to subjugate people. And I think also the assumption to some degree is a level of inherent superiority,
hmm
right? So that which brings me to my next topic, which is, and I really want your take on this, probably more than any of the other ones I've been talking about. Well, actually, I'm going to ask you a question first. Is an alliance is alliance with these people or progress that is rooted in deception worth having? As you pointed out, these people will end up being the big losers. And you say, yeah, presumably to shorten 1,000 years of darkness. But what does 1,000 years of darkness versus 100 mean to the countless millions who are already dead?
Yeah. Well, the myth of like progress is a myth, right? That things are always improving, get better, get easier. That we have this ultimate goal where problems are all solved. So, so that's the first thing. Like the first foundation is like, so an alliance based on this notion of progress is not acceptable because we don't know the ultimate outcome, right? That it's like the trolley, when you have that trolley scenario. It's like,
Right.
well, let's do this alliance because just in case, like
Right.
if we kill that one person, maybe we'll save all these other people
Right.
and get things on track. There's way too many questions
No
for
pun
that.
intended. Right.
Um, yeah, so yeah, I mean, I don't believe that the ends justifies the means. It's the way of getting there. So you could see this corruption happen. So I always saw that the religion, the cult, was as a corruption of the original message. Maybe that's just, maybe I am an idealist, but I can't help but to not see that as ultimately the thing that actually, it's like this, it sows the seeds of the disasters that we see that would come, right? Like where then somebody who has like that ability to read minds and do whatever the mule, like it sets the stage for something like that. And if they
Right.
did it right, maybe, and just were upfront to be like, are you willing to sacrifice knowing, for the 10,000 years? A lot of times, look, people are willing to sacrifice for their, like, just like right now in our world, we're willing to sacrifice the whole like climate for our children's, like not even our grandchildren, our children,
Right.
what they have to deal with. And we're just like, for convenience, they're like, yeah, we just need some more plastic, and I need gas in my car, and I need
Right.
this stuff.
Any more plastic? Right.
Okay, it's got to be clean, just extra clean. I need the water bottle.
So the thing that I feel like you're going to appreciate, and I wanted to bring up, and I want to give you an opportunity to talk about, is because you talked about the myth of progress, and one of the things that these priests use in their sort of litany or whatever to the masses is, we're going to bring back, you know progress and science and predictive techniques for farming and etc. And the interesting thing is, you see that narrative being propagated even today for the developing world. And as we have more and more public intellectuals and scholars, we have historians like yourself out there talking about this. Europe was not any more advanced than most of the other countries that they invaded during colonial times. Like if you look at places, like people have this really, like, as an example, this mistaken notion that India was this kind of backwater, and it's like, no. At the time, like the British actually attempted to set foot on Indian soil twice before they finally managed to get a foothold, right? And they were repelled by the Mughals. And then if you look at places like Mali, where we know at Timbuktu, which was a major center of learning as early as the 12th century, you have Central Asia, the post Mongol Khanates, like those were places of incredible art and technology and science and architecture. And these things are all things that predated the ascension of your quote unquote modern European empires. Can you give me the historian's perspective, please?
Yeah, I mean, it's like when we think about like technology and even like access. So I would just like to like kind of layer that, right? We think, oh, we're in such a better state now when like people are still dying of preventable diseases that weren't endemic, like they weren't spread out like just the pestilence that did occur that we're seeing just like um, when they had kind of like sustainable living. So I don't. I think that this idea of being able to use technology, like who gets access to that, right? Like who gets access to modern transportation or even just like water filters when most of the world globally lives in slums and they don't have access to clean water, health care. But yet we have people like we could be like, yeah, we've cured this or we've solved that issue and we're able to extend the life of this person while we still have people in the United States who can't access basic treatment. So I do think that while there's different and new types of technologies, those come at a cost. And then sometimes like those like when it comes to like being able to predict crops and things or make sure that things are like seeds, like now we have a whole bunch of food allergies because we're just like we've been eating Monsanto wheat
Right.
and like and it's been we've created rational systems where it's like industrial farming. So that's really made where it's like we're setting up the stage for a global die-off of humanity because if they just target a few food sources, they're like, yeah, we can just get rid of those strains of
Right.
people. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I do think it's
It
I
adds
mean,
another dimension
absolutely,
to it. Yes.
yeah. I mean, when we think about like the kind of early modern, like 1452, when Europeans in their mercantile system were going out, and um, they weren't any more advanced than the Ottomans, who, when they conquered Constantinople, they had the best technology. They're the ones that brought the gunpowder to Europe and had mastered that. Now, over time, like the use of the gun was actually more useful in the slave trade, not through the transatlantic slave trade, not through conquering, but actually through trade. And it accelerated the internal divisions in Africa. But it would take until the late 19th century before Europeans could go into Africa. Like they didn't have either the technology, the medical, they didn't understand the systems of like how people knew when to move seasonally. And so when like Belgium went into the Congo and they moved people around and forced them to live in zones where they knew like we're not supposed to be on the lowlands during this season, they actually caused mass deaths, like 20 million people dying of starvation, dying of diseases that the Congolese folks, like, they weren't dying of that before colonialism. So it was an absolute disaster. Similar like the famine in India. You could just see just like the amount of death that the Industrial Revolution caused. And even now, you know, how many people died? Millions died from COVID. Hey, that's but progress.
I wanted to put this out there too, because I'm seeing this recently, and this is very relevant. But the governor of Florida was talking. He gave a press conference the other day, and he talked about how I posted about this earlier, and his part of his argument for one of the things that he wants taught along, you know, aside from completely destroying the the I'm sorry, the critical race theory curriculum. One of the things that he wants taught is how African slaves benefited by being taught trades, and how they were able to parlay that into, you know, a living after the end of slavery. And I was like, well, first of all, and it brings me back to this idea that people love to talk about in the Italian invasion of North Africa and the British Empire and French, is they always say they brought the railroads. And I'll say, you know what? The first railroad was built in England in like, I don't remember, 18 whatever. And by the end of the century, Germany, Austria, Belgium, Italy, everybody had railroads by the end of the century, and not one of those countries invaded the other in order to get it or in order to build it. So why is it that now you want to say, oh well, we built the railroads in Africa? And it's like, dude, you didn't need to. But the other thing is that chattel slaves, all, you know, they had metalworking and metallurgy as early as the 3rd century BC, right? They had weaving far longer than that, you know, also. And the idea that slaves would be able to ply their trade, which none of them were able to, none of them were permitted to, and when they did ply their trade in order to benefit their communities, what happened? They burned the communities down. So
Mm-hmm.
the reason why I mentioned the I'm not going to say his name because he's an idiot, the governor of Florida. The reason why I mention that is because this whole clerical slash cleric as statecraft thing smacks of that. It smacks of the whole, well, we're going to come and bring you railroads, and we're going to bring you, you know, metalworking, and we're going to bring you weaving, and in exchange, you're going to basically become part of our larger alliance, which is going to produce essentially bodies for us to go and fight a war.
Yeah, I mean you're absolutely right. I mean that the kidnapped Africans brought technology, skills, culture, things that they weren't able to that the broader society was able to profit from. Even they brought in vaccinations, inoculations. That was something that was indigenous to Africa, for the smallpox. And so
Yep.
the technologies of rice, indigo, you know, and just very inventive ways of doing things. And so, you know, there is, I mean, he wants to keep that myth because it serves him, right?
Right.
And that's what they would say, even if they were like, okay, we were that um, our ancestors were in better material conditions in Africa. They would use the orthodoxy of Christianity, like, well, now that when they left out, like when we took them out of Africa, we saved them. They wouldn't have been Christian. When there was
Right.
Christianity, in Africa, both in Ethiopia and in the Congo, of beautiful indigenous forms of Christianity that were deeply rooted for hundreds of years. And in Ethiopia's case, like since the beginning of
Right.
Christianity.
Right.
So, yes, we could have had an indigenous African Christianity without Europeans, but they think that they saved black people either through faith, science, um, and being civilized.
Right. Right. Yes, and that's like that was the final thing that I wanted to touch upon. I'm not going to take too long with this, but and I sort of alluded to it when I mentioned this idea of inherent superiority, which is
Mm-hmm.
this mythology that people are primitive or they're savage or whatever, and it's like that mythology simply needs to die. You know, just because I'm
Mm-hmm.
wearing pants and a bow tie and a frock coat does not make me civilized. And I mean, you know, you have people out here right now wantonly spreading disease and not washing their hands, and they want to point at other people in developing nations and call them savages. It's ridiculous. I want to give you the last couple minutes before we sign off, before I do my closing shtick, to give me your thoughts on this episode.
Okay, well, I guess I have some complex thoughts around it, right? So we see, like we see my man's kind of like vibe, like he's like, okay, I want this marriage, but it's not just for marriage, like he wants to do some other things. So I think that's it
I
was
mean, you mean he
interesting,
wants to get
right?
busy? He
He
wants to
wants
get
to get
busy.
busy, with the
Can I? Can
human,
I?
not just the
I want to inject some. Okay, so I want to inject something because we do have a few minutes. I want to inject something that I want you to include your commentary. I'm sorry to cut you off, but this was something that I wanted to put in my comments and I forgot to, because the woman who plays the queen, the future queen, the future empress, and not that it's particularly important, but she does present as a woman of color,
hmm
and one of her parents is Welsh. We actually from IMDb don't know who her other parent is. I'm not going to get all tied up in that, but I want to mention the fact that he is effectively trying to extend the life of his dominion by essentially appropriating breeding rights of a woman of color, at least
hmm
perceptually, right? So I please include that in your analysis. Like, am I off in that?
mm. Um, yeah, I mean, thank you for bringing that up, because I mean, she's also kind of like, yeah, because I mean, she does present as a woman of color. I mean, it's clear. I mean, she's not white. I mean, even though we have Tom Jones, he's Welsh. Like it's like you have these
Right.
Welsh folks. You're like, what is going on with the Welsh folks?
Sorry, Tom Jones.
Because I mean, there's no way he's not black. I'm in denial. Like he's
Right,
aged so
right.
well.
We claim him. He's
We are
claimed
claiming him.
the racial draft.
But yeah, in the racial draft, there are so many people we're trading. But yeah, I mean, this is so the fact that you have that they have also the art, which I think is very interesting. It's like that kind of movement art and the pigment. So they do have these resources that are highly valuable, and that her womb, right, is the beginning of a new empire, right? So he has this idea of like, so he's shifting from, because he knows that there's that that their genetic material has been corrupted. But he's like, yeah, there's not going to be an issue like when we mix, like you're a strong stock, I'm a strong stock. um so so it is a little bit like, and then on top of that, are we not getting some of the colorism? Because it's all like everybody that is, like every woman in this series is biracial. And that that allows, I mean, does that give them that allowance to do certain things and be, um especially with her ambiguity in some ways, like she's like, like when they're taking someone of color, maybe they're mixed race, maybe they're ambiguous, like with the South Asians, like when the first season, like they really did kind of make them space Muslims, like very
Yes.
warlike and everything. And so the
It was Meghan Markle vibes, by the way. There's some
yeah,
serious. I was getting. I'm
yeah.
sorry, but I was getting Meghan Markle vibes from her.
Yeah, but I mean, she was a kind of like sassy black woman, and he was like, I'm digging it, and it's I mean, but that's, I mean, I don't know. Is that how the Romans rolled like that, right? You have the Cleopatra controversy, but I mean, it's there's some other like pretty cool things. My cousin, who's actually a gamer, he has a podcast too on. He actually found a Belgian story of one of the knights of the Round Table. So like, we got to go into that. So like I want to do of the like the black knights, like black characters in
Queen
medieval
Charlotte's.
Europe. Yeah, the Queen
Yes.
Charlottes, and that there
Sure.
are these stories. So we'd have to have him on
Okay.
Fresh Pulp
I'm
for
down with
him to
that.
talk about
I'm down with that.
what he found. Yeah, so we're gonna do some like
We can
cross
nerd out.
posts. Yeah.
So, okay. So, this we have there was so much of this episode, and we're gonna continue talking about this because I feel like these are undercurrents and recurring themes. But I want to once again thank you for being my co-host, for being on here. This is Margari Hill. She is the co-founder and executive director of Muslim Anti-Racism Collaborative. She is also the Muslim Futures strategist. I'm sorry. She's also the futures strategist. Sorry, for Fresh Pulp magazine, and obviously my co-host here at Dark Matters podcast. So I want to thank her for being here. I also want to ask everyone to please go and interact with social media for Muslim ARC. They're a wonderful organization. They provide anti-racism competency training. I learned a lot, despite that I feel that I'm very in tune with, my failings. Whatever you think you know, you will learn more. I also want to ask everyone to please go and interact with Fresh Pulp Magazine's social media. I want you to, if you're watching us on YouTube, please like, share, and subscribe. Follow us on Twitter. Check out our tip button. But also, I have recently updated our wish list, which is comprised primarily of books. It's on the front page. It's on the right side, about midway down. So if you feel like either just contributing to the acquisition of one of these books, or you want to buy the book for us outright, feel free to. You can put a note in your Venmo or Cash App tip that says, "Hey, this is for this book" or whatever, and you can prepare to get a thank you here on the podcast. So once again, thank you again, Marguerite. We will see you all next week, and enjoy the rest of your weekend.